Turn on red, push.
Explain the.
The Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on anti-public lands extremism. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Thank you all for being here today for the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands hearing on combating anti-public lands extremism. We're here today in part to review the results of a recent Government Accountability Office report detailing the impacts of anti-government extremism on public land managers and federal facilities. As we'll hear, that report found some shocking details about the threats these federal employees faced just doing their jobs. Federal land managers and law enforcement personnel have been followed around in stores, had their homes staked out, and have even faced attempted murder at the hands of those who promote anti-government ideologies. I hope that we can all agree that this is unacceptable. These people are hardworking public servants employed by the federal government. No one should face fear and harassment in their place of work or in their communities. I also think it's important that we keep the larger context of these incidents in mind, because these extremist ideologies do not develop in a vacuum. Anti-government rhetoric, more frequently being adopted by officials in positions of power, is being used as a weapon against our public lands and the public servants who manage them. Attempts to push this ideology into the political mainstream has a very real impact on people's lives. As GAO found, quote, some field unit employees said that in certain circumstances they consider receiving threats a normal part of their job. Officials describe being threatened while off duty, such as being harassed in local stores or being monitored at their home, which officials said in some cases they did not report because it was a common occurrence. If we could turn to the screen, we'll see a handful of statements public officials have made in recent years. What Senator Harry Reid may call domestic terrorists, I call patriots. Former Senator Dean Heller of Nevada on the 2014 armed Bundy militia standoff in Bunkerville, Nevada. The BLM has become a bureaucratic agency of basically terrorism. So at what point do we band together as elected officials and say enough is enough of the BLM? And that was from State Representative Michelle Fiore of Nevada. The federal government, the BLM, the Forest Service, the FBI, the DEA, any of those guys, they're not elected. Those other entities, they answer to me, Beaver County, Utah Sheriff Cameron Noel. You, the people of Nevada, not Washington bureaucrats, should be in charge of your own land. I will fight day and night to return full control of Nevada's lands to its rightful owners, its citizens. And that was from Senator Ted Cruz. This rhetoric often turns into violence. In 2012, Utah Governor Gary Herbert signed the Utah Transfer of Public Lands Act, which required federal agencies to cede ownership of most federal land to state control after 2014. A researcher at the University of California, San Diego, found that in the year after Utah and other Western state legislatures made their land transfer demands, those states saw a nearly 11% increase in violence directed at federal public lands employees. In that context, it is particularly disappointing to see my Republican colleagues invite a witness today with little experience on the issues we're here to discuss and who has written favorably about giving away federal land to state and private control. Former BLM Director Bob Abbey said in 2014, quote, the political rhetoric today does lead to animosity and increased tension, and there is a belief because of that rhetoric that it's okay to do certain things outside the law, and some people believe that they're going to get away with it. Today, I hope we can examine this rhetoric and the danger it creates so that we can consider how to protect public employees, promote collaboration, and end the culture of threats and violence. With that, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Curtis with his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely no one in this room on either side of the aisle condones violence or threats against federal employees. It's unfortunate that I feel I need to even make that statement. Our boots on the ground are often in difficult positions. They may have to enforce unpopular laws and regulations that have great impact on local communities and people's livelihoods. Their safety should be and is of the utmost importance. While I'm supportive of the practical recommendations made in the GAO's report we are looking at today, I am concerned that the title and narrow focus of this hearing may be misleading. I take issue with the assertion made that there is a widespread problem of anti-government threats and abuse occurring in the West. Being from the West and representing a state with a high percentage of public lands, I would like to set the record straight. Calling for local ownership and control of public lands does not embody an attack on the federal government. As a matter of fact, many of my constituents feel just the opposite. The vast majority of my constituents impacted by the federal government's public lands management decisions are hardworking taxpayers raising families and contributing to their communities. They love the beautiful public lands that surround them and want to be good stewards of them and part of the decision-making process. This does not make them bad people. They're not dangerous or threatening to federal land managers in the field. In fact, I frequently hear how much they appreciate and work well with the local agents of these federal agencies. Landowners and users who disagree with specific management decisions should not be made to feel that somehow they will be placed on a government watch list of potential threats. Villainizing Westerners and those who disagree with management decisions does nothing to build the bridge of trust and cooperation that is vital to proper stewardship of the land, and as is the case with most of our politics, Finger-pointing and divisiveness is counterproductive in the long run. We will hear from GAO witnesses today regarding the report that the full committee chairman asked them to compile, which looks at the progress that the BLM, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and National Park Service have all made in recent years to bring their human-occupied facilities into compliance with post-9/11 federal security standards. This report, while important to consider, only took into account 4 years' worth of data of recorded threats among the 4 land management agencies, which each had different and often inconsistent methods of recording. There also does not appear to be a way to differentiate between the most serious threats of violence and incidents as minor as a parking ticket. I believe Republicans on this committee largely support the recommendations made in the GAO report for the agencies to continue to make progress in taking common sense efforts to secure federal facilities. However, nothing in the report makes any mention of the existence of a culture of anti-government attack and abuse, which is the title of this hearing. My hope is that through the testimony of the witnesses here today, we can all learn the powerful lesson that the vast majority of citizens are not like those in the rare, high-profile, headline-grabbing incidences that will be showcased today. My constituents do not wish to have conflict and naturally seek compromise and cooperation from their government. I hope to hear examples today of how federal lands managers and local citizens have worked to listen to each other, seek mutual understanding, and come up with collaborative, on-the-ground solutions which netted the most positive outcome for all concerned. As a committee, we should be promoting and fostering more of these cooperative and collaborative efforts, which will do far more to facilitate safety than spending even tens of millions of dollars to create hardened, secure fortresses. With that, Madam Chair, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. I look forward to their testimony, and I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Now I would like to turn to our witness panel. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when there is 1 minute left and red when time has expired. After the witnesses have testified, members will be given the opportunity to ask questions. The chair now recognizes Mr. Dan Nichols, rancher and former Harney County Supervisor. Mr. Nichols, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Dan Nichols, and I'm a self-employed rancher of 41 years, a BLM permittee, a past permittee on the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, a 5-term retired county commissioner, a High Desert Partnership board member, and a participant in 3 of the 5 ongoing collaborative initiatives in our community. The economy of Harney County is a natural resource based with a reliance on the multiple use concept of public lands administered by the U.S. Forest Service, the BLM, and the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Harney County lies in the southeast corner of Oregon and is 75% federally and state owned, and it has a land mass of 10,120 square miles, larger than 6 West Coast states, has an only population of 7,380 people, of which 5,200 are registered to vote. A quick look at an Oregon state map, and one would incorrectly assume that the area is basically uninhabited. My comments today to you come from this perspective. Rural Americans, especially in the largely federally owned and managed 11 western states, are not being listened to, much less heard. Opinions and desires of a populace residing well outside of rural communities are politically driving issues that result in legitimate grievances with federal land management policies. Much as what is often described as anti-government is really coming from a place of feeling excluded or being on the losing end of unbalanced natural resource management. In the course of doing their jobs, federal employees become the local messengers of new policies and regulations, resulting in them becoming the recipients of the frustration and anger of the people that are not being listened to. Our community has issues of concern with federal land management. We're not unique in that regard. What does make us unique is the manner in which issues of potential dissension and polarization are resolved. A culture of collaboration has been established in Harney County that enables a diversity of opinions to be respectfully and collectively considered. A positive attribute to the process has been working directly with the federal employees in our community. Through that interaction, the community has gained an appreciation for them as professionals, individuals, and contributing members in our community. Collaboration also provides a venue for discussion of issues with the broader community beyond Harney County. For us, the term community includes those with an interest and a commitment to participate, including stakeholders from outside the local area who care about issues in ways that we may not always appreciate. It is necessary to have them at the table as well, because the collaborative process gives everyone an opportunity to speak and listen. We learn and better understand each other's views. It is a setting where rural voices are heard and understood by those from urban areas that are the source of many of the problematic issues. Collectively, through collaborative efforts, Harney County residents have found the ability to meet our interests. As following examples, the Steens Mountain Cooperative Management and Protection Act of 2000, which was sponsored and written by Congressman Greg Walden, recent Malheur National Wildlife Refuge Comprehensive Plan, and the Harney County Wildfire Collaborative and Harney County Wetlands Initiative. The culture of collaboration has changed the ways we deal with complex and controversial issues in Harney County. Real benefits have been achieved for the local community, the federal agencies, and the natural resources we all care about, urban and rural alike. We can all learn from the lessons of people that are successfully bridging divides. Our experience can provide the opportunity for Congress to develop a format for a much-needed larger discussion. I ask for your support of a larger collaborative to produce meaningful progress in addressing legitimate grievances and concerns of the American public. Collaboration is recognized as a successful approach to issue resolution in Harney County, the state of Oregon, and needs to be implemented on a national level as well. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nichols. The chair now recognizes Professor Peter A. Walker, a professor of geography at the University of Oregon. You have 5 minutes, sir.
My name is Peter Walker. I'm a professor of geography and environmental studies at the University of Oregon. I personally observed the 2016 armed occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Harney County, Oregon. After the occupation, I conducted research in Harney County for more than 2 years, including over 100 in-depth interviews with individuals representing all parts of the community. My observations are recorded in my book, Sagebrush Collaboration: How Harney County Defeated the Takeover of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. A lot can be learned from the Malheur Refuge occupation for preventing such incidents and for safeguarding federal employees and enabling them to work constructively in rural communities. The great majority in Harney County opposed the Malheur occupation and rejected the militants' plan to launch an anti-federal government revolution from Harney County. I use the word militants because they used armed force and military-style tactics to achieve a radical political goal. The situation was explosive. Almost certainly, if the community had heeded the calls of the militants, lives would have been lost. Harney County rejected the militants' call to revolution in large part because the community had invested for decades in building collaborative approaches to solving precisely the kind of resource management issues the militants said could only be resolved through armed force. In the past, there had been a lot of hostility between the community and the federal agencies, but by the end of the 1990s, Harney County was tired of fighting, and especially tired of litigation. The existing system was failing to produce outcomes that almost anyone wanted, and even when people knew that regulations would be coming, they wanted to get ahead of the process and make sure local voices would be heard. Farmers, ranchers, environmentalists, tribes, and federal, state, and county workers intentionally built a culture of collaboration. The community bet that better solutions could be found by building relationships and really listening to each other, humanizing those with whom they might see things differently. For decades, over one-on-one phone calls and cups of coffee at kitchen tables, the community created their own ways to solve problems. When outside militants proposed violent confrontation, the community had a better way. Federal employees were central to this history. Ironically, the outside militants had no idea that Harney County was recognized nationally as something of a poster child for collaborative approaches, including building positive relationships with federal workers. The militants believed by vilifying and harassing federal employees, they would rally support for their cause. The militants' leader later said that he never met a Bureau of Land Management or, by implication, any federal employee who is a, quote, good person, unquote. By 2016, most people in Harney County just didn't see it that way. Through collaboration, federal employees were contributing to better problem solving, in large part by making themselves more integral parts of the community, and above all, by listening. No longer just uniforms and badges, federal employees were friends and members of the community. And Harney County does not like members of the community being harassed. When the Malheur occupation ended, ranchers with allotments on the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge held a dinner to honor the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employees who had borne much of the harassment from the outside militants, to reaffirm that the federal workers are valued members of the community. As a nation, we're enormously fortunate that by chance the militants chose Harney County. The community literally told the militants to go home. We should see the relatively peaceful outcome at the Malheur occupation as hopeful evidence that conflicts between rural communities and federal agencies can be minimized, and in at least some cases, win-win solutions can be found that defy the divisive culture that afflicts our nation today. But Harney County is much like many other places. The experience of collaboration in Harney County demonstrates principles that can be applied in other rural communities. That's my most important message. In Harney County, I saw that endless division and conflict do not need to define who we are as a nation and how federal employees work in our communities. There are better ways. America can do better, and Harney County proved it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Walker. The chair now recognizes Ms. Anne Marie Fennell, Director of the Natural Resources and Environment Team at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. You have 5 minutes, Ms. Fennell.
Chairwoman Holland, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our report on how the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, and National Park Service protect their employees and secure their facilities across nearly 700 million acres of lands that they manage. My statement today summarizes our findings. For the 4 federal land management agencies, I will discuss 1, what is known about the number of threats and assaults against their employees. 2, approaches agencies take to protect their employees. And 3, the extent to which the agencies met federal facility security requirements. First, available federal law enforcement data show a range of threats and assaults against the 4 federal land management agency employees in fiscal years 2013 through 17. The severity of these incidents range from phone threats to the stabbing of an employee outside of a federal building. Number of incidents varied by agency. For the 5-year period, there were 88 incidents for BLM, 66 for Fish and Wildlife Service, 177 for Forest Service, and 29 for Park Service. FBI data for this time period showed the FBI initiated under 100 domestic terrorism investigations into potential threats to these 4 agencies. The majority of these investigations involved BLM, as well as individuals motivated by anti-government ideologies. For instance, the FBI investigated a case where a BLM officer received over 500 harassing phone calls and several death threats once the officer's personal information was posted on Twitter. However, the number of actual threats and assaults is unclear because not all incidents are captured in the agency's databases for various reasons. For example, some incidents are investigated by local and state law enforcement and may not be included in federal databases. In addition, land management agency employees do not always report all threats. Some said that in certain circumstances, they consider receiving threats as a normal part of their job. Second, federal land management agencies use various approaches to protect their employees, such as building relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement entities. For instance, Las Vegas police kept a patrol car outside a field unit in Nevada during a high-profile court case. Agency officials noted factors that can affect their ability to protect employees, such as those in remote locations. Also, the number of field law enforcement officers at the 4 agencies has declined from fiscal years 2013 to 18, with Forest Service experiencing the largest decrease of 22%. Third, the 4 land management agencies have not completed all facility security assessments required by federal standards developed by the Interagency Security Committee, or ISC. Agency officials cited various reasons for not doing so, including lack of resources, training, and expertise. Not complying with the ISC requirements to complete these assessments could leave agencies exposed to risk to protecting their employees and facilities. While Fish and Wildlife Service has a plan to complete its assessments, BLM, the Forest Service, and Park Service do not. The ISC standard also requires that agencies conduct assessments using a methodology that meets certain key requirements. The Forest Service meets and the Park Service partially meets these key requirements. BLM and Fish and Wildlife Service have not yet established methodologies. Without compliant methodologies, agencies may not identify all the risks their facilities face or the countermeasures to mitigate those risks. We made 6 recommendations calling for agencies to develop a plan to conduct assessments and methodologies to comply with ISC requirements. The agencies agreed and noted a number of steps they were going to take to implement the recommendations. Chairwoman Holland, Ranking Member Curtis, and members of the subcommittee, this completes my prepared statement. I'm pleased to respond to questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fennell. The chair now recognizes Ms. Katie Tubb, Senior Policy Analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Ms. Tubb, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak for you today and for the interest in examining federal lands issues. Decision-making on federal lands has been contentious for many years, decades, if not longer. In some respects, that's not surprising, given that there's potential for conflict when federal lands consume large parts of the West. This has major implications for states and individuals as their ability to foster promising a place to live with economic diversity, property and other tax revenue for services like education and public safety, physical space, and access to lands for a variety of cultural, recreational, and economic activities. Further, management on these lands is diverse and spread across multiple agencies and bureaus, governed by a complex of overlapping and often conflicting laws, missions, and regulations, which different administrations have implemented in drastically different ways. A litigation culture, all but invited by broad, unclear, and outdated laws, has led to perverse incentives, and when people feel that they are not being listened to or the levers of power are out of reach, tensions spill over. Undoubtedly, civil servants are also in a difficult place navigating these laws. When it comes to conflict, federal district and unit offices should ensure their staff are adequately equipped for their own safety. Just as important, staff should be trained to handle and diffuse conflict towards solutions. However, to go overboard is to miss the point, and federal actions can wittingly or unwittingly create unnecessary tension. Federal actions, again, real or perceived, to slow walk leases and permits, being unwilling to seek compromise, failing to be present and available to the community, or escalating the severity of charges can create or exacerbate conflict. Ultimately, I believe Congress needs to do a wholesale review of the federal, state, and the muddle of laws governing it. However, even in this broken system, there are examples of collaboration amongst conflicting interests that have yielded good results. I think those boil down to some basic principles of cooperative federalism. The first being that solutions are site and situation specific. Specific decisions reflect the unique circumstances, histories, and priorities of communities and land users. Americans can and do successfully pursue varied and competing interests with creative, nuanced compromises. This requires relying on people who directly benefit or are harmed by those decisions. Second, solutions rely and respect the role of private property owners. Rather than being irrelevant or a barrier to public land management solutions, private property owners can be great assets. And in fact, ownership is a powerful incentive for stewardship. Third, solutions empower states and communities. And while there are many degrees of and ways to accomplish this, empowering states and communities to drive decision-making has proved effective. States and communities already share the cost of maintaining federal lands, whether by the liability of no management, the lost opportunity of poor management, or the infrastructure needed to support management. My written testimony offers examples of how each of these have resolved conflict. Among those, the Utah Grazing Improvement Program, the White Mountain Apache Tribe Successful Forest Management Program, the Forest Service use of Good Neighbor Authority, Wyoming's exception under the Antiquities Act, and the Federal Lands Freedom Act proposed in the 115th Congress. I'd like to draw out just one example, that being the 1984 compromise for Forest Service and BLM lands in northern Arizona. Within the broader protracted national debate over wilderness area designations, a coalition of interests came together to seek resolution in a more timely fashion. I think it's very interesting who formed this coalition. It was a mix of energy companies and groups like the National Parks Conservation Association, Sierra Club, National Wildlife Federation, local chambers of commerce, the Grazing Advisory Board, and a variety of local, state, and federal politicians. The discussions resulted in an all but universally satisfying compromise with the Arizona Wilderness Act. The compromise created 9 wilderness areas, including the BLM's first. It also allowed for uranium mining and timber production within painstakingly negotiated boundaries. The point is, coming to solutions is hard work and complicated work. The way forward through collaboration is rarely clear-cut and easy and an obvious outcome. But I think the more Congress can encourage and agencies pursue, and states and private individuals initiate collaborative approaches, the better chances we are of reaching through conflict to solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tubb. Thank you for that valuable testimony. The chair will now recognize members for their questions. And under Committee Rule 3D, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes. And I will start with Mr. Tonko. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Holland. And thank you for bringing this hearing together. And thank you to our witnesses for your input. The unfair and negative treatment of federal employees harms our nation. It threatens the loss of institutional knowledge and undermines the performance of the agency and service of the American people. Elected officials and others in positions of power and public trust should not be able to use these employees as political pawns. Even the way we talk about them can have a personally dangerous and professionally devastating consequence on these individuals, to say nothing of undermining the serious and important work that they do. No one, no matter where they work, should feel like they are being held hostage in their own home or has shots fired over their heads while working. Surely we can manage at least this minimum standard of humanity for our own federal employees. In this divisive time, our words matter more than ever. Public land managers are already being harassed and sometimes attacked. And we have a duty to rise above this toxic political climate in our words and in our actions. So my first questions are those to Ms. Fennell. Your report says federal land management experts experience threats and intimidation. including being monitored at home and harassed at the grocery store as part of their daily lives. It is so common that some don't even report it to their colleagues anymore. That sounds like a more dangerous reaction than a difference of opinion about land management. Could you tell us more, please, about some of the experiences that have been reported?
Some employees have not reported various incidents because they informed us that under certain circumstances, they may consider that just a part of their regular job duties. Some, however, indicated that it depends on the particular circumstances. So what may appear to be a threat for one employee may not be perceived as that for another. So there is judgment that is involved in terms of whether they come forward in terms of reporting potential threats.
Thank you. And in your testimony, you briefly mentioned that many employees were traumatized by the Malheur takeover, with some never returning to work or transferred to other agency field units. Can you briefly elaborate on the impact that threats and literal assaults on federal employees have had on retention and institutional knowledge at our federal land management agencies?
Well, some of the employees informed us that that was indeed the situation from the Malheur experience, that they were traumatized by the event and chose to ask for a transfer or not return immediately to work. That was an illustrative example of the situation that occurred there. But we did not hear consistent examples throughout in terms of how many transfers there had been requested. So we do not have specific information to respond to that question.
Do you expect that you will get additional information, or?
It was not part of our particular scope for our review, but that is something that we can follow up with the agencies and get back to your staff.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And Mr. Nichols, how has Harney County changed since the takeover? And what are some of the social consequences you have seen resulting from this kind of violence perpetrated in the name of taking back the land?
Marion County was elated it was over with. Things haven't changed dramatically within the community, other than there is division to some degree where there wasn't before over several things. But basically, the community got back on its feet, rolling and doing what we've always done, is that's working together and trying to survive all of the things that we have to survive in our community. It's been a very positive reaction to the whole situation, and we're moving ahead, moving forward.
Thank you. And Professor Walker, you spent a great deal of time interviewing local residents since the Malheur takeover. What kind of long-term social damage did this inflict upon them?
As Commissioner Nichols said, I think generally the community has bounced back. It's still a community that works very well together. I think there has been a lot of long-term damage to specific individual relationships. There are people who still tell me that they won't patronize businesses that belong to people who they perceive to be on the other side of the issue. I think there's a general sense of wariness, of concern about suspicion about others in the community that there was not before the Malheur occupation. On the other side, I would actually say that in my observation, if anything, the damage to some of those relationships, some individual relationships, has actually been countered by a reinforcement of a commitment to working together through the collaborative model. I attended the very first, to my knowledge, the very first collaborative meeting in an initiative of the High Desert Partnership known as the Harney County Restoration Collaborative, Forest Collaborative, in March 2016, right after the occupation ended. And the facilitator of that group told me that the attendance at that particular meeting was higher than he had ever seen before. So it's a mixed bag. There is some damage, but there's also been a reaffirmed commitment to the collaborative model.
I thank you. Well, I've well exceeded my time, and I apologize. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Walker, on page 24 of the GAO report, it reads, agency field officials said that building relationships with the public, both visitors and local citizens, can help keep their employees safe by cultivating trust and reducing potential tension. After hearing your testimony, it sounds like that could have been written based on a case study in your area. Would you agree with that?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So the report says that the best way to keep the federal employees safe is to build relationships of trust. And it sounds to me like that was...
Yes, I would generally agree with that. I think that really you should be asking
Okay, Mr. Nichols, please, go
Mr.
ahead.
Nichols ranches in that community, and but my quick understanding is that relationships in that community prior to the establishment of the collaborative culture that Commissioner Nichols refers to was quite bad. And since then, that trust has been built in ways that really served the community well under pressure, yes.
I would agree.
Yeah, and maybe to both of you, as the world looks back on your community and this incident, this seems to me like a rhetorical question, but maybe it's not. Would you all both rather be remembered for the relationship building with the federal employees or this one incident?
The relationship with the employees or what, sir?
So my point is that, and my fear of this topic of this hearing is it's focusing on all that's bad. And what I'm hearing from your community is there's a lot that's good. And my question is, I'm assuming you'd rather be remembered for the relationship building that you all have done and not this one incident.
Yes, sir. Like I referred to earlier, the Bundy occupation is over and done. We have moved on. Yes, there are differences of opinion about things. There always is. There always will be. But there isn't the hostility and the aggression towards one another or anyone else that was evident during that time. Basically, it was total anarchy in our community for a month, 6 weeks. That is not a good place to be, not a good place at all.
It's my sense that it's also not a reflection on who you are as a community.
No.
Much more on the relationship building side.
It is.
I think all of you have spoken today about the importance of building relationships to solve problems without creating more divisiveness. I was very fortunate to be part of an Emory County public lands package that was signed into law this year. And that, to me, was a perfect example of how locals are working together with the federal agencies to find harmony and peace in these difficult public land conflicts. My county worked daily with local BLM officials, and because of that, they came to better decisions. And when I go down in that county, I hear great things about the local representation from BLM down there, and I feel like it was a win-win. Ms. Tubbs, I'm curious, the title of today's hearing alleges a widespread culture of anti-government attacks and abuse. Let me just read that again. A widespread culture of anti-government attacks and abuse. First of all, do you agree with this characterization of an epidemic-level threat of an anti-government activist?
No, I don't, and I think it's not characteristic to label all conflict as anti-government. You know, as I think we've said across the panel, these are passionate issues because they affect people's lives. That doesn't mean they're anti-government.
Yeah, thank you. In your testimony, you argue that it's important for federal land management agencies not to create unnecessary tension. What are some ways agencies can diffuse tension and encourage better relationships?
I think it's absolutely the relationship building. It's seeking compromise. Granted, I think land managers have a very difficult position to play because of the underlying law and regulation. Nevertheless, I think there's enough tools in there to create a give and take amongst land managers and the people affected by their decisions.
We've heard, and I want to endorse that we need to keep our federal employees safe, and I wouldn't want anybody to think that I felt otherwise. But I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to share my concern that it doesn't always feel like this is a common concern for all federal employees and law enforcement, even local law enforcement. I would hate to compare the statistics that we've heard today for federal law enforcement threats versus local law enforcement. And I believe the number of lives lost in local law enforcement would far exceed this. And so I'd like to just end my time by a plea for care and concern for all federal employees, all law enforcement. We've not even talked about those down at the border. I've been down there. I know they're receiving threats on a consistent basis, and I want to make sure that we keep all of them in mind as we work to make their environment safer. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. The chair recognizes Mr. Lowenthal for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and as I say, thank you to all the panelists. I want to start with Ms. Fennell. In your testimony, you stated, as I read, that as the close of fiscal year 2018, the number of field law enforcement officers at each of the 4 land management agencies has declined since fiscal year 2013. And that decline makes it more difficult to protect employees. Can you first elaborate on the impact that these declines have had on employee safety?
It is one of a number of factors that have impacted the federal land management agencies' efforts to protect federal employees. The law enforcement officer decline ranged from 7% for the Park Service to 22% for the Forest Service from 2013 to 2018. The officers have a vast amount of land in which to survey as well. And so the number of law enforcement officers per millions of acres of land is a fairly small ratio. There are various efforts that are underway to try to address that particular issue. We heard about from the federal land management agencies, including the spirit of sharing law enforcement officers to address various events that may be occurring, just as one way to address the decline in the numbers of law enforcement officers in the field.
Can you help me understand why there was the decline in law? Was it just fiscal? Why was there a decline in law enforcement from 2013? It was not a time of great reductions in the U.S. economy. In fact, we were beginning the recovery by then.
It was not the focus of our line of questioning because we were looking at the various factors that can impact their ability to protect employees. However, what law enforcement officers had indicated is that there had been budget and resource constraints contributing to the decline.
Mr. Nichols, you know that President Trump pardoned the Hammond family in 2018. You know that.
I know that, yes.
Yes, I'm just asking you. Can you tell me how that family is perceived in Harney County?
Well, sir, that perceived, you're asking me my perception. My perception is there's 2 different ways of looking at them. They're outstanding people and they're good community members. But apparently something was out of sync with the Department of Justice and that course of action took place. Other than that, I don't believe it's my place to be answering that type of a question.
I was just asking what the community felt about this or perceived it, not about, was it much of a reaction? Was there, you indicated your reaction and that you thought they were excellent people. I'm just wondering whether there was much community reaction when this took place.
Okay, the community reaction is, the community is made up of people. There are different opinions. It went a variety of different ways.
I'm going to yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. The chair recognizes Mr. Grijalva.
Very much, Madam Chair. And Ms. Fennell, in preparing the report, how often did land managers describe the public misconceptions about land use law or what federal agencies really do in terms, as you were doing your report?
In terms of the federal land management agencies and their efforts to protect their employees, they noted a number of different factors that can impact their ability to protect their employees, including the need to ensure that they have opportunities to inform the public and visitors about the land that they are managing and any particular incidents that might arise. So it was part of an opportunity for dialogue with the public who would be visiting their lands that topic would arise.
And a little bit of a follow-up, Professor Walker, you're a scholar on land use and political history behind land use laws. Could you explain a bit more about the misrepresentations of the Constitution that anti-public land, anti-government activists rely on, and more pointedly, how courts have ruled on this issue throughout our history?
I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't quite follow the question.
Okay. Yes, the misrepresentations of the Constitution that a lot of the anti-government, anti-public land activists on this issue rely on, and how the courts have ruled on constitutional issues regarding public land in particular.
How did the misrepresentations
Yeah.
of the Constitution, yeah. I actually think that's a very important question. The militants at the Malheur Refuge have a very idiosyncratic interpretation of the Constitution, to put it mildly. Their interpretation is that the federal government has no jurisdiction outside over land or really over almost any other issues outside of Washington, D.C. And my belief is that that has given a lot of sense of legitimacy to a broader anti-government movement out there, and it's expressed in particular through social media, where people seem to express opinions that anti-government activities, political activities, but up to and including violence is justified because the government has overstepped its constitutional authority. That constitutional interpretation is not supported by any legal scholars or historians or the United States Supreme Court. But when the militants spread that kind of mythology, it gives legitimacy to the anti-government movements, including violent ones.
Appreciate that, because and appreciate the chair holding this hearing, because it is about the health and safety of the agency employees, the land management. And I think it's let's not minimize it, what happened in Oregon and happens in Arizona, that these folks, public servants, do come under a great deal, not only political, but personal attacks, threats, harassment, and that, their well-being should be a priority. And this hearing's a step in that direction. Just how things get misrepresented. Let's take one example. It was mentioned, the witness, the Arizona Wilderness Act was important to the state of Arizona. The important thing to note here, it was a wilderness bill and not a resource conservation bill. So equate it with anything else that's going on, I think is a mistake. The act did not consider threats to clean water. It did not consider how to protect the Colorado River watershed. It did not consider the impacts of uranium mining, which is key to the future discussion. The majority of the lands that considered in the Grand Canyon mineral withdrawal under Obama were never even reviewed during the drafting of the Wilderness Bill, and staffers who helped draft the Wilderness Act have testified on record that conflating their bill with the withdrawal is simply incorrect. Yet somehow we hear these arguments making this false comparison between the Arizona Wilderness Act and the Mineral Withdrawal Act. I think I don't see how any of this justifies, that line of thinking justifies extremist attacks on federal employees. It's insulting to, I think, federal land managers to get harassed in the supermarket, followed home, have their cars, in their cars, get graffiti painted on their houses, get attacked at work, to be told that the Arizona Wilderness Act is just too much for a reasonable people to handle. I think we can make bipartisan progress on this, but we're here because anti-government rhetoric dehumanizes government employees, period. And those employees are being threatened and harassed because they're doing their jobs. And we need to discuss how we improve their living and working conditions as we speak, and how they're being treated, and what protections we extend to them. We're not here to, I don't think, any misinformation. I think the GAO report's pretty clear, and I think we have an obligation to do something about it, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Grijalva. I would recognize myself for 5 minutes. Professor Walker, you spent time with the Bundy militia at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 2016. Did the views they shared with you sound anything like what you've heard elsewhere? In your opinion, was the militia expressing commonly held sentiments about how the American people want their public lands managed?
Commonly held opinions in Harney County or generally?
Really, anywhere that you've been where,
Yeah.
yeah.
Short answer is no. This is a very small community of anti-government activists. They belong to that particular group that is centered on the Bundy family is really a very small group of individuals. But what I'm concerned about is that they give a sense of legitimacy to wider spread anti-government groups. What happened at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was that the Bundys came to the wildlife refuge, and they began from a particular ideological perspective having to do with religious interpretations of the Constitution. But what they were advocating for was essentially a overthrow of the federal government, a replacement of the existing federal government. I asked the leader of the group directly whether he was really advocating for an overthrow or a replacement of the existing federal government, and he said yes. They made that message very clear. And other groups who have also advocated for the replacement of the existing federal government heard that message, and they heard the message that the federal government is broken, it's broken beyond repair, it needs to be replaced, and it's the duty of patriots through armed force to reestablish constitutional government. My concern is that some of those groups outside, this is nationwide, some of those groups have latched on to the Bundy family as giving a feeling, an impression, an image of legitimacy to their movement. Their movement, to a large degree, has a history tied to racism, xenophobia, anti-immigrant policy, and those sorts of ideologies. And the Bundy family has given a sort of more appealing public face to those movements. And in that sense, I think that even though their size as a group is very small, they've given legitimacy to wider spread movements. That's my concern.
Thank you for that answer. Mr. Nichols, in your testimony, you stated that Harney County is almost like a poster child for collaborative approaches. I was wondering if you could briefly explain how Harney County residents work with federal land managers to collectively solve problems rather than arguing, getting frustrated, and taking it out on federal land managers. Do you have any suggestions of ways this committee can encourage the use of approaches like this more widely?
Yes, I do. We have proved over and over in several different cases that sitting down and talking things through with everyone that has a vested interest in an issue is beneficial to the cause, beneficial to the result, the community, and especially the federal land agencies involved. Over the course of years, things have changed dramatically in Harney County. We never were an anti-government, quote unquote, but there have been and there still are things that need to be discussed and looked at. And that goes everywhere, like I said, well, across America. During the occupation, I got calls literally from Maine to California, and no matter how small the federal land mass was in a state, there were still issues with it. That's not to say it's all bad. It isn't something that can't be overcome. But again, the people need to be listened to. And that is quite a broad question. You people are listening today. We appreciate that. But the time needs to be spent like we do in a collaborative process. It takes a long, long time to get to truly know the other people, their ideas and their values. And what we've come to learn is everybody's values are about the same thing. It's just how you come to the end results that are different. And I can't express enough how we need to start communicating people to people, not an idea nor an agenda nor an organizational affiliation, but people to people. And until that happens, we all want protection of our federal employees. That's paramount to them doing their job. But that is not looking at the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is something going on in our society. Protection is necessary, but quite honestly, we shouldn't have to be protecting our federal employees. That should be something ingrained in the people themselves. It's a societal problem. It's a lack of communication. And again, things aren't as horrific in the Western United States as some of the things I've heard today are. There are places, undoubtedly. My son works for the federal government. He has for 16, 17 years. Where he works right now, he loves it, and the people that they're serving love their services that they provide. It's basically a recreational type of a service within a forest in Central Oregon. Where the rub comes in quite often is in the land masses that people are trying to make a living. They're paying taxes, they're raising children, generational, they're taking care of the land. And there's always a threat of something coming down the pike and disturbing that. And again, it isn't an anti-government, it's a fact of frustration and wondering what the future holds. So,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your insight. It's been very helpful today. Do you have any other questions? I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be open for 10 business days for these responses. Again, we're very appreciative that you all took the time to come here. Thank you so very much. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.